All right. Well, happy to see all of you. Um, our regular ALI attendees, Susan and Ria and Sandra and Corrine, a number of other people. But one of the wonderful things about bringing in Megan, so it's always a pleasure to introduce a new scholar into our ALI um, uh, faculty and family, because what they do is that they bring along with them some of the people who love to learn and study with them, and those people get exposed to the Advanced Learning Institute, which meets every Monday morning at 9:30. It's open to all. It's a program offered through the Jewish Collaborative of Orange County. And basically, we offer little mini mesters on very interesting topics that have anything to do with history or Bible or art, or various people come from all over the country and teach for us. So Rabbi Mymon is going to be with us for 2 weeks, doing the beginning of his sort of deep dive into the history of Eretz Yisrael from a perspective that we normally don't get. The last two Mondays in March, we'll be studying with Rabbi Jack Schlachter, who's both a physicist and a rabbi. And if Mike forwarded you the the link to today, you can see. But he worked uh, on in New Mexico and in different in the early days of nuclear, the places where nuclear energy was developed. And he talks about sort of the some very famous Jewish people who really were the engine behind the nuclear energy movement. So he calls it Jews in Theory, and that should be very interesting. And then in April, we have a wonderful 3 weeks with our great Rabbi David Lazar, who will be doing a very interesting comparison from Easter to Passover and from Passover to Easter to talk about how um, sort of the evolution of the Christian faith incorporated Pesach into their theology. It'll be very interesting. So he'll be with us in April, and we have a wonderful lineup May, June, July. And Mike will be back, God willing. So this is it's great that he's here, and I welcome all of you. And I will get that problem fixed about the prove you're not a robot. So thank you for letting me know. And without further ado, Mike, I turn this over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rabbi Tilchin. It's quite an honor and a pleasure to be here. And thank you all for coming on to listen. I have to tell you that you probably noticed a few minutes ago, the system kicked me out somehow, and I had to go back and log on again. If this happens, please don't panic. I'll do the same thing and I'll come back and we'll continue. So today we're talking about the history of Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, and how the Jews, from the first Jew, Abraham, Sarah, um, to we're going to talk about the time Joshua conquered the land of Israel. So a period of some 750, almost 800 years. And I know clearly we have about an hour to talk about those things, and maybe we're going to need a whole weekend for it. So it'll be somewhat informal. If you have any question along the way, although there will be a Q&A session at the end, feel free if something is not clear to just unmute yourself and keep going, asking a question. Um, it's not necessarily in such a way that you have to wait until the end. You can ask me throughout it because I'll address some major milestone and give background that usually you will not see in just if you were to read a book about it. Before we get going into from the first Jew on, I want to give a little bit of a background. In 1933, Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, the rabbi that founded the Reconstructionist movement. He was born in Lithuania, by the way, 1881, came to the US when he was about 8 years old, and died in New York in 1983, 102 years old. He wrote a book called Judaism as a Civilization. Very controversial book at the time. It's 1933. And he's saying at the time that Judaism is not just a religion. It's peoplehood that includes culture and literature and language and organization. As you can imagine, there was a serious rejection of this idea, mostly from the Orthodox communities. I think today, almost everybody, including the Orthodox community, understand that Judaism is more than just a religion. Judaism is the only religion that is connected to a homeland. None of the other major religions or small religion has anything of this nature. There are some exceptions, I should point out. If you look at the religion of the South Pacific, say the religion of the Hawaiian people, it is connected to the Hawaiian Highlands, but it's really a small number of people. The vast majority of people in Hawaii are Christians or Mormon or Buddhists. So there are some small number of people in Hawaii that subscribe to the official Hawaiian religion that is connected to the Hawaiian Islands. But as a major religion or semi-major religion, Judaism is the only one that's connected to the homeland. And essentially, that's dictated from the very beginning. It's part of the contract, the covenant between God and Abraham. God promised to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, and so on, the land, that promised land, that land of Israel. So it's at the core of Judaism, essentially from the beginning, because the covenant between God and Abraham basically dictates it. Jews lived in the land of Israel for about 4,000 years. You know, when we think about exiles, for example, let's say the Babylonian exile. So you think, oh, everybody was out. Not so. In antiquities, when one nation conquered another, like the Babylonian conquered the land of Israel, they didn't stop there, by the way. They also got Egypt, but they conquered the land of Israel. They usually kill those that pose a military threat to them. They exile those that will pose a political threat to them. The Cohens, for example, the priests, were exiled, most of them to the island of Jerba, which is north of Tunisia today, part of the Phoenician shipping route. And then they let the regular people work the land and pay taxes. Otherwise, what's the point of conquering that land? Rashi, this extraordinary Torah and Talmud commentator, took a universal story of creation. The Torah begins with the story of creation, and turned this universal story into a nationalistic story of creation. Rashi explained that the reason the Torah began with the story of creation, that if in the future the people of the world will tell the Jews, hey, the land of Israel is not yours. You took it from the 7 Canaanite nations. The Jews can say, hey, look, God created the earth, so it's God's to give. As God wanted, he gave the land to the Canaanite nations. And as God wanted, he took it away from the Canaanite nation and gave it to the people of Israel. That's how Rashi saw why the Torah begins with creation. When you think about it, most of the stories we relate to and the Torah and the commandments, etc., most of them begin when Moses is born. The story of the Jewish people begin then. But no, we have the whole book of Genesis to address certain things, a lot of things, and starting with creation. So now that we have a little background about the land and to what I'm about to talk, let's start with the year 1950 before the Common Era, about 4,000 years ago. Abraham, his wife Sarah, and his nephew Lot are coming to the land of Israel, Canaan at the time. And we'll talk about Canaan and Canaanite nations and so forth. God promised him the land. God promised him to his son. God promised it to his grandson, to Isaac, to Jacob. But they were guests. They were all guests in the land of Israel. They were not strong enough or in high numbers to defeat the 7 Canaanite nations that occupied this land. You know, it's interesting when you go toward the end of the book of Genesis, when Jacob and his family coming down to Egypt during the famine. It's chapter 46 of Genesis. The Torah lists the people that came down from Beersheba, southern Israel today, to Egypt because of the famine. And it lists 70 souls. That's not a nation, that's a college football team. So the people of Israel that lived in the land of Israel at the time were not big enough to form a nation or to defeat the local Canaanite nations. That's not to say that they didn't go to war. In fact, Abraham went to war. The first time a Jew went to war, coincidentally enough, and it's kind of related to our time, he went to release the hostage. His nephew Lot was taken hostage by the 4 kings in the southeast portion of the land of Israel near the Dead Sea. And Abraham took 307 people and went to fight them to release his nephew, the hostage. But again, there was still small number of people. They became a nation. The Jewish people became a nation in Egypt. And during the Exodus, we know that they numbered maybe 2 million people. They counted the men, 600,000. There's a whole discussions of whether it's 600,000, Elef, or 600 aluf, head of clans, which would have made a smaller number. Nevertheless, it's maybe 2 million people. But even during this time, the Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, their descendants lived in the land of Israel. They purchased land, and you can visit some of those places to this day. I'll focus on one particular spot, Me'arat HaMachpelah. It's often translated into English as the cave of the patriarch, cave of the patriarch and matriarch. Me'arat HaMachpelah in Hebrew loosely translates as the cave of the 2 folds. The Torah goes into a great deal of discussion explaining the negotiation and the purchase. Right from the very beginning of the Parashat Chayei Sarah, we learned that Sarah lived to be 127. And then when she died, Abraham buried her at Me'arat HaMachpelah, the cave of the 2 folds. He bought that land for 400 shekel, 400 silver shekel. So he actually bought that land. It wasn't given to him, although they tried to. He insisted on buying it. And the Torah gives so much details about the negotiation that has to do with this particular spot, this field that Abraham bought that has the cave on it. And the obvious question is, why? Does the Torah give us a great deal of detail about the place where King David was buried? King Solomon was buried? How about Moses, the greatest leader and prophet of all? The only thing we know is that God buried him in a valley somewhere in the land of Moab, east of the Jordan River. I'll take some segues and sidesteps throughout this presentation. The rabbis explained that we don't know where Moses is buried in an effort to avoid creating a cult of Moses. Cult is blind allegiance, and we Jews are allowed to think for ourselves. And so the rabbi said, the reason we don't know where is so we don't develop a cult of Moses. But it's true. We don't know a lot of the burial spots of a lot of our great leaders, but the Torah goes verse after verse after verse into the negotiation and details. And you have to think why. Yes, we don't idolize people. We Jews only idolize God. By the way, you know that American TV show called American Idol? In Israel, it's called A Star is Born, because Jews don't idolize people. And so even the name of the show has changed. And even the Israeli version of it has changed. Moses is mentioned really just in passing and not in every version of the Haggadah, in the Haggadah. The main character that actually gave us the liberation, the freedom, the very first time an entire nation went from slavery to freedom, is not even mentioned in the Haggadah, the book of that story. Only some versions list him and kind of in passing, not all of them even list him. So why? Why does the Torah spend so much space on those columns of the Torah into the negotiation and the details about this field that contained this cave? That was a field day for the Kabbalah folks of Tzfat 450 years ago. They went and looked at it and tried to figure out what it is. It's ironic to me sometimes when I think about Kabbalah, because in America and in Europe to a great extent, it's Madonna and Britney Spears that made Kabbalah very popular. Before that, it was not. My grandfather was a Zohar scholar of sort. He studied the Zohar every day. I do too. I have it here. But I've asked them when I was a child, because they took care of me part of the time when I was young, to teach me some of this. And he said, wait till you're 40. It's not necessarily that he came up with just arbitrarily a number 40. It's what Maimonides said. Maimonides said you should not study the Zohar, Kabbalah, until you're 40. Presumably by that time, you have a good grasp of the Torah and the Talmud, the Pshat part of the Torah, and then the Talmud, the rabbinic writing that contains the Mishnah and Gemara and additional commentary. My grandfather died when I was 26, so I never really had a chance to study with my grandfather. But the Zohar tells us that Me'arat HaMachpelah, the cave of the twofold, is the entrance into the Garden of Eden. The Zohar said that the cave at one end is the entrance into the material world, this world, and at the other end is the entrance into the world to come, to heavens. That's how the Zohar look at it. It's a bridge between our world and the next world, between the material world and the spiritual. The Talmud also picks on it. In Masechet Eruvim, the Tractate of Eruvim, if you want to look at it, it's on page 53. The Talmud is telling us that there's an argument between Baba Aricha and Shmuel. Aricha means long in Hebrew, so it's assumed that this rabbi was tall, so they call him Baba Aricha. Shmuel, again, a very well-known Babylonian scholar, they're arguing. And in this debate, Baba Aricha said that it's called the cave of the twofold because there was one chamber and another chamber behind it. And Shmuel said there was one chamber and another chamber above it. This is in that cave. And they're saying that there's more to it. We all know, because we read in the Bible, that Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah, Rachel is not buried there, she's buried in a different place, are buried there. 3 couples, 6 people. The Zohar, the book of Kabbalah, said that there's more to it. And the Talmud goes even further. You know, the city of Hebron, where the cave is located, the word Hebron has the same root as lechaber, to connect. So the Kabbalah, folks, the Kabbalists looked at it and said it's a connection between the two worlds. The rabbis of the Talmud, the Gemara, looked at it in another way. They said the city of Hebron is also called Kiryat Arba, the city of 4 couples. And so the Talmud is saying that Adam and Eve, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah are buried in it. 4 couple. This is why it's called the city of 4, Kiryat Arba. 2,000 years ago, King Herod, the king that the Senate in Rome appointed as the king of the Jews, built a beautiful building above that cave. You can still visit it to this day. King Herod was an Edomite. The rabbis of the time, the Pharisees, did not consider him or the Edomite Jews. But the Edomites are descendant of Esau. And Esau was the son of Isaac and Rebekah, just like his brother Isaac was a Jew. But yet the rabbi did not consider him a Jew. They considered themselves Jews. The rabbis didn't consider them. Nevertheless, King Herod is appointed by the Roman Senate. There's actually writing, historical records of it, as the king of the Jews. He was friend of the general son that controlled the land of Israel at the time. And so what he does, as a good follower of the Roman Empire, he builds a magnificent building. He builds the fort at Masada. He built the port at Caesarea. And that wasn't easy, by the way, because Caesarea does not have a natural deep ocean, sea, Mediterranean Sea. They had to create that deep space in the water with rocks. So it was quite an engineering feat. If you ever go to Caesarea, walk the ancient and watch this audiovisual explanation of how they did it. It's remarkable. It's wonderful engineering from 2,000 years ago. Nevertheless, he built quite a few things. You know, before King Herod, the temple stood at the top of the hill in Jerusalem. The people had to stand on the slopes. King Herod put 4 retaining walls to create a flat surface around the temple. So the people will stand on the flat surface. There are stairs that lead to the Temple Mount, that surface. The western retaining wall of that platform that King Herod built is the Western Wall, the holiest place we have today in Judaism. If you haven't done it yet, next time you're in Jerusalem, go to the Western Wall tunnel. Israeli archaeologists literally dug tunnel underneath the plaza that you see in front of the Western Wall. And when you go into the tunnel and you go further down, you literally see the streets from 2,000 years ago. You see the base of the Western Wall. And it goes up and down, so you come kind of almost to surface level and again and again. At one point along this tunnel that has water storage units and walking streets, etc., you'll see a sign on the wall that says 80 feet from here in a direct line was the Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies inside the temple. 80 feet is nothing for archaeologists to dig, and it would have been dug a long time ago. But there's really 2 main reasons why it has not been dug so far. One, we don't have a high priest. We haven't had one for 2,000 years. Only the high priest is allowed to enter the Holy of Holies, and only one time a year on Yom Kippur. And I don't think the Israeli rabbinates or anybody is willing to designate an archaeologist the high priest so he can enter or she can enter that space. So that's not going to happen. The second reason, even more astounding to hear, is that if they dug up this 80 feet, it would be exactly underneath where the Golden Dome is standing. That's an important religious spot for the Muslim religion. And you can just imagine that the Muslims will have riots all over the world because they're said Israel is trying to undermine the holy place or to destroy the holy place by digging a tunnel. Never mind that Gaza has 500 miles of tunnels under buildings, hospitals, schools, etc. If Israel dug 80 feet, there could be another riot all over the world, and nobody wants that. Okay, so back to Me'arat HaMachpelah. King Herod built this beautiful building 2,000 years ago. And of all the buildings that were built during the Roman time, this is the only building that is completely intact. None of the other building is either standing or fully intact. Think of the Colosseum. Think of any place, magnificent as it might be, even if you think about the land of Israel, the fort of Masada, the port in Caesarea, etc., etc. They're not standing intact. They're either in ruin, partial ruin, or no more, except for this building. So of the thousands of buildings that were built during the Roman era, this is the only one to this day that is perfectly intact. And the reason it withstood all the earthquake and the wars of the last 2,000 years is because they used the stones around the city of Hebron, which are very hard and strong stones. And this is why to this day, it is just as good as it was maybe when it was built 2,000 years ago, completely intact. You can go visit it today if you want. In fact, this building is kind of separated by a partition. Part of it is a Muslim mosque, and part of it is the important burial spot that is very important to the religious Jews or Jews in general. It's also very important to folks that follow Kabbalah. Have you seen people that follow Kabbalah have a red string on their hand tied? Looks like a bracelet, but it's literally just a red string. What folks of Kabbalah will do, they will take a big yarn and roll it around the caves or the stones at Me'arat HaMachpelah, the cave of the twofold, say prayer, and then they take it back and they sell portion of it for people to tie around their wrists. It is bringing, I'm not superstitious, so I don't follow those kind of things, but they believe that it's bringing them good things and good health and good everything. And so people that follow Kabbalah will wear it. Next time you see somebody with a red yarn or threads around the wrist, you can ask them if they know where it came from, and you can tell them where it came from. I'll tell you another story about Me'arat HaMachpelah. Remember, this is all a place that was purchased by Abraham 4,000 years ago, and you can visit it today, a connection between the Jews and the land of Israel. So most of us probably heard of or seen Rabbi Shlomo Goren, the chief rabbi of the Israeli Defense Forces in 1967, standing with the paratroopers at the Western Wall, holding a Torah in one hand, a shofar in the other hand, and he's blowing the shofar right in front of dozens and dozens of paratroopers that just released the Temple Mount. They just caught the Temple Mount from the Jordanian army. This is kind of famous even in Israel, and there are pictures and talks about it. There's more to that story that's hardly ever discussed. After Rabbi Shlomo Goren was done with the Western Wall and the Temple Mount, he told his driver, let's go to Me'arat HaMachpelah. Let's go to this cave of two folds. The driver got him into the Jeep. They drove south and they went to Hebron. When they entered the city, they were really amazed. Nobody on the street. All the stores are closed. All the windows are closed. All the doors are closed. No one to be seen. A bunch of makeshift white flags hanging from many windows and doors. White flag is a symbol of surrender. Rabbi Goren didn't know what was going on. He just kept going. They arrived at Me'arat HaMachpelah. He prayed over there, and then his driver helped him plant a makeshift Israeli flag on top of that building. Rabbi Goren thought, because he just finished with the troops in Jerusalem, that Israel already conquered Hebron. Israel didn't yet. The Israeli forces were still on the hills surrounding the city, and it wasn't until several hours later that Israeli troops rolled into the city and conquered it. In military terms, according to the laws of war, the people of the city of Hebron surrendered to a Torah-carrying rabbi in a jeep. Fascinating story. So today you can visit it if you want. If it's time of strife in the area, there are buses that are bulletproof and protected for rocks, etc., with like some kind of a chain link around the windows that will make those daily trips to the cave of the patriarch and matriarch, or the cave of the two folds, with some military escort, and you can go visit it if you want. Let's talk about the boundaries of the state of Israel. Sorry, the boundaries of the land of Israel, Eretz Yisrael, as we know it from biblical time, etc. The rabbis explain that the promised land, Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, was just an initial stage. The boundaries were to expand in future years, not for the sake of territorial gain, but for the sake of expanding and spreading the Jewish value of Judaism to the people of the world. In fact, during biblical time, Jews settled all the way to the Euphrates River. That's Iraq today. I don't think you're going to find many Jews to say that Iraq is part of the promised land. It's clearly not. But the expansion was for the sake of expanding the value of Judaism, not territorial gain. Which brings an interesting point. The people of Israel are standing on the east side of the Jordan River, around the area just north of the Dead Sea today. And they're about to cross and enter the promised land. They have to deal with the 7 Canaanite nations, but nevertheless, they're standing on the east side. 2 tribes, Reuven and Gad, come and they say to Moses, the land here on the east side of the Jordan River is good for our sheep, cattle, goats, etc. We want to stay here. Moses doesn't like it initially. He thinks that, one, they want to avoid fighting the war against the mighty Canaanite nations, and also the other 10 tribes wouldn't like it. The 2 tribes are afraid to fight the war, and maybe they would want to say the same thing. But after some negotiation, the 2 tribes assured Moses that they will come and they will fight at the front line against the Canaanite nation. And when all the wars are over, they will go back to the east side of the Jordan River and settle over there. And Moses agreed. But it's interesting, when Moses agreed to let those 2 tribes, he also allowed half the tribe of Manasseh to be there. So half was on one side of the Jordan River, the other was on the other side, the east side of the Jordan River. And you have to ask yourself, why? Half the tribe of Manasseh didn't ask to stay outside the promised land. Why did Moses allow it? Which goes back to what I was saying earlier, how the rabbis understood it. Moses, being the greatest prophet of all, already saw into the future that in the Messianic era or in future years, as it was 3,300 years ago, Judaism value will expand to other and will go forward to the other nation, starting with the surrounding nation. So he took the first step of allowing 2.5 tribes to be outside the boundaries of the promised land so that they will start that process. It's interesting that those 2.5 tribes didn't quite understand it that way. In fact, in the book of Joshua, that's the book that comes after the 5 books of Moses, in chapter 22, we learn that the tribes east of the Jordan River build an altar for God. Now, I should point out that from the time the people of Israel crossed the Jordan River and entered the promised land until the first temple was built by King Solomon some 350 years later, Shiloh, was the place where everybody went during Sukkot, Pesach, and Shavuot. We used to be a religion of pilgrimage and sacrifices. It's after the destruction of the second temple that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai changed Judaism from a religion of pilgrimage and sacrifice to a religion of study and prayer. But for 350 years, Jews went 3 times a year to Shiloh. That's in the hills north of Jerusalem. So the people in the land of Israel saw the altar and the holy place that the people east of the Jordan River built as an attempt for cessation. They were thinking, hey, they're trying to break away from us. They were ready to go to war against their own brothers and sisters. Joshua sent Pinchas, the same zealot that killed that prince from the tribe of Shimon and his Midianite girlfriend. He sent him to negotiate a solution. And Pinchas, who went with some elders, indeed came up with a solution. And he assured the people inside the land of Israel, based upon the agreement with those outside the land of Israel, that they will not make any sacrifices or worship anything in that spot. They would still come to Shiloh. But in future years, if several generations later, the people inside the land of Israel will tell those people outside, the 2.5 tribes, well, you're not part of us. They'll say, here's the proof. We have this altar for God. What are the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael as the Bible saw? It's almost like the land of Israel, the state of Israel today, with 3 serious differences. There are more than just 3, but they're so minor, it's not really important. The first big difference is that the city of Elat at the southern tip of Israel was not part of the promised land or the land of Israel, Eretz Israel, as it was describing in the Bible. Just north of the Israeli border into southern Lebanon, going to the Litani River, that was not Lebanon. That was part of the promised land and part of the land of Israel, biblical. And the third difference, major difference, is the entire Judea and Samaria. Some people call it the West Bank, was part of the land of Israel. So the state of Israel today is occupying more or less pretty much what the Bible referred to as Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, the promised land, the land of milk and honey, etc. How did they conquer? How did the Israelites conquer the land of Israel? A little bit of background. Conquering the land of Israel, required the destructions of the 7 nations of Canaan. It's actually a commandment. It appears in Deuteronomy chapter 20, that they have to destroy those 7 Canaanite nations. Let's see if I remember. It's the Canaanite, the Hivites, Girgashite, Amorite, Jebusite, Hittite, and Hivites, the 7 nations of Canaan. The Torah is telling us we have to destroy them. This is the same Torah that tells us to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. Seem contradictory of sorts until you kind of put it in perspective. That's how wars were fought 3,300 years ago. The winning nation, tribes, kingdom, whatever the case might be, literally destroy and annihilated the losing one. In the Amarna letters, they're not really letters, they're clay tablets in Egypt. 3,500 years ago, a general is sending a letter, a tablet, to Pharaoh. That general was leading the Egyptian army, and he's telling Pharaoh that the Amorites are troublesome. And just like all the other nations do, he is going to annihilate the entire tribe of the Amorites. That's how war was fought at the time. It's hard for us to see it today because we think, oh, we have to avoid collateral damage and create those corridors for civilian to get out, etc. War is very different today. The law of war is very different today too than it was 3,300 years ago. Maimonides, that lived about 800 years ago, wrote The Laws of King, a book named The Laws of King. You can still find it on Amazon. And in it, Maimonides explained that destroying the 7 nations of Canaan was the last resort. They were giving 3 options. 1, evacuate the Holy Land, so just leave. No harm will be done to you. 2, if you want to remain in the Holy Land, you have to reject idolatry. I'll come back to this in a moment. And 3, if you decide to stay, you have to accept Jewish sovereignty. Somebody else will reign over you. So what is this with reject idolatry? The previous 40 years before the people of Israel entered the land of Israel, they were getting the Torah. They were getting a whole new set of commandments, most of which were completely new to humanity. First of all, it was revolutionary in the sense that it was monotheism. No idols and no multiple gods and no figurines or no Baal, the Canaanite god, that Elijah proved to 450 prophets, false prophets, that it's nothing. It cannot do anything. Baal, B-A-A-L, Baal. So the Jews in the desert receiving this new set of commandments and receiving this all new way of living, a new religion based on monotheism and based on laws of God. And the Canaanite nation are working under completely different set of rules. Idolatry and rules where the king is everything and everything is done according to the king's rule, etc., etc. So this was a threat to Judaism. That was another reason to destroy the 7 nations of Canaan, because they pose a threat to the Jewish religion. Aside from the fact that that's how wars were fought, even if they were not posing that religious threat, they would have been annihilated. It's interesting, though, that they were not completely. Because later on in the Bible, you read about during, for example, the time of kings, that they follow Baal and they, mixed with some of the people. How did the land of Israel was conquered? Joshua conquered it about 3,250 years ago. Remember, Moses dies and he's buried in a valley somewhere in the land of Moab, and Joshua now is a leader. He sends spies into Jericho. Jericho, according to anthropologists, is the oldest city in humanity, 10,000 years old. There were always communities and tribes, but city, it's the oldest city. Nevertheless, just like a military general will do today, first you start with intelligence gathering. So Joshua sends spies into Jericho. You remember the story of Rahab the local harlot that sheltered them in exchange for they promised her that they will protect her and her family once they conquer Jericho. Once Joshua got all the information that he needed, intelligence gathering, he crossed the Jordan River just north of the Dead Sea today and attacked the city of Jericho and conquered it. There were a couple of reasons why. You would think that he would want to go with easy places to build the confidence of the Israelites army. But he went to the most difficult place, a city that was actually with walls, fortified, and very well protected. But Joshua was thinking, if and when we conquer this one, all the other people, the Canaanite nation, that don't live in fortified and protected city like Jericho, will fear us and they would leave voluntarily. Therefore, we will avoid some bloodshed. Another explanation, the people of Israel were already standing on the east side of the Jordan River across from Jericho. So it was just the natural way. It's the first obstacle on the way to conquering the land of Israel. Jericho is literally across from the Jordan River, some flat land, and then Jericho. Now, I should point out that nobody found to this day the destroyed walls of the fortified city of Jericho as they are described in the Bible. There's simple explanation to it when you think about it. First of all, it's not necessarily that the city of Jericho today stood exactly where the city of Jericho stood 3,300 years ago. It's quite possible that the city of Jericho today was built a short distance away. You want an example? I'll give you one. Jerusalem, the city of David, all of us know as Jerusalem inside the walls as we see them today. But those walls are only about 500 years old. They were built by the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Empire. The city of David, Jerusalem, that we know from the Bible, the city that King David conquered 3,000 years ago from the Jebusite, is about 250 yards or so east of the Dung Gate, east of the walls of Jerusalem. The Dung Gate is the closest gate to the Western Wall. You come in through the Dung Gate and go through security to enter the plaza in front of the Western Wall. Archaeologists in Israel uncovered the city of David. It literally sat on a very steep hill and it was fortified. King David sent his general, Yoab ben Zeruiah, and they came in through the tunnel because the water source is at the bottom. And they came through the tunnels, and that's how they conquered the city. There was no way for them to conquer the city climbing up on those steep hills and then still dealing with walls at the top. This is why the Romans spent so much time before they could conquer it. This is why the Babylonians spent so much time, a year and a half, before they were able to conquer Jerusalem, biblical Jerusalem. Today, if you can go, if you ever go to Jerusalem, and I hope you will, go see the archaeological dig of City of David. You literally walk the same street King David walked. You see homes that were maybe for the upper echelon of the Jewish community there. They even found bones of fish. The Mediterranean Sea is a long way away, and there was no FedEx or UPS back there. But those royalty people could get whatever they wanted, including fish. You can walk the walk, literally the path that leads from the city of David to the Temple Mount, and walk the same stairs our ancestor walked to the Temple Mount. You can see the stores at the side where they sold those kind of things that if you came from far away and you didn't want to bring the first of your harvest or sheep or lamb or whatever, you could have bought it there and bring it. You could see the mikveh when people will go and immerse themselves before they enter the high or the temple ground. And so it's possible that the city of Jericho is somewhere far or not far from it. Second reason is the Palestinian Authority control the city of Jericho, and they're not very cooperative when it comes to proving anything that has to do with the Bible or Torah or anything of that nature. In fact, they do exactly the opposite. There are a number of instances in which the Palestinian Authority actually got caught destroying historical artifacts. There's one instance when they dug up an area that was Jewish in nature from 3,000 years ago, and they dumped all the land in a landfill. Israeli archaeologists had to go to the landfill and sift through it to find all kinds of rings and clay jars and things with Jewish emblems on them, Jewish words written on clay jars, etc. So that's probably the reason why the walls, the fortified walls of the old city of Jericho were not conquered. Nevertheless, after Joshua conquered Jericho, the strongest city in the Canaanite, among the Canaanite nation, his troops went south and started to conquer small communities, villages, tribes on the south. And then they headed north. In the Galilee, there's a city called Hatzor to this day. My mother used to live in it before she married my father, by the way. And the city of Hatzor was also a fortified city. And they figured, Joshua and his general figured, now that we conquered Jericho, many people left. If we conquer Hatzor in the north, it's fortified, it's well protected, then everybody else will run away. And that's exactly what happened. Once they conquered Hatzor, whoever still remained among those 7 Canaanite nations left to the north and to the east and allowed the people of Israel to settle in the land of Israel. Before I finish, I have an hour and I try to stay close to it. It's very important that I think you'll understand that although we covered only about 750 years or so, there was never a time the Jews did not live in the land of Israel. Never. Under occupation by somebody else, as guests, as people in control, etc. But there were always Jews in the land of Israel. And certainly from the first Jew to this day. When we meet next week, God willing, I'll address some of the things that have to do with the Davidic King David, the first Commonwealth of Israel, the second Commonwealth of Israel. The state of Israel is the third Commonwealth of Israel, just to put it in perspective, and things of that nature. And with that, I'd like to open the floor for question. If you do have a question, please unmute. I'll do my best to answer as best as I can. Thank you all also for staying with me for the last hour and listening, and I'm happy to answer questions. Comments as well? Yes, Linda.
Well, I just want to thank you, first of all, because I do believe it's a very timely topic that we are talking about this. And I mean, you're always a wealth of information, and I always appreciate everything that you have to say. I was trying to take notes while you were speaking, and I was doing pretty good, and then I kind of got a little lost. But I wrote down quite a bit of information, and I won't take up time now, but maybe at a later date we can go over it.
Absolutely. I'm happy to do it, of course. And if you have any questions as we meet or during services after lunch and learn, etc., I'm happy to answer. As you notice, I don't read the presentation. I kind of speak from what's in my head, and I'm happy to share it. I often say knowledge is useless if you don't share it. What good is knowledge if it's only in your head, right? Thank you, Linda. Any other comment, suggestion? Yes, Rosalie?
I came in late. I'm sorry, but conflict. I always have a hard time understanding what gave the Israelites or the Hebrews the right to conquer all of these other nations just because they didn't think like them. And maybe it's not just because, but their thinking certainly was different from the Israelites. It just bothers me.
I understand, and I think you started your comments by saying you came a little late. We addressed it early on, so
Oh,
I'll
you did?
address it.
Okay.
The Torah began with the story of creation, and Rashi, the commentator, explained it didn't really need to, but it started with the story of creation. So if the people of the world will say in the future, why did the Jews, the Hebrew, the Israelites took the land from the 7 Canaanite nations? The Jews can say, God created the earth, so it's God's land to give. And as God wanted, God gave it to the people of Canaan. And as God wanted, God took it away from them and gave it to the people of Israel.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm sorry. I may have
That's
just.
okay. That's
Okay.
perfectly okay. Thanks for the question. Any other comment, questions?
Oh, Sandra
Yes,
here.
Sandra.
I just want to thank you for your teaching. It was very interesting. There's a lot to absorb, but I want to thank you again for coming, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Okay. Well, thanks again for your time and for the courtesy and for being here the last hour or so. And I appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you again in next week on Monday. Call it part 2 if you want. There's much more to cover. But part 2 will try to cover the kingdoms and the commonwealths and things of that nature. Wish you all a great week and a wonderful day. Please be well. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.